Today I'll be showing you guys how to install a twin disc clutch. This particular one is made by the guys over at Centerforce. This is going to be going behind my 1972 big block Mopar, and that's paired up with a TR6060 6-speed manual transmission. I'm actually planning to pull out a considerable amount of power out of this 383, so I'm definitely going to be needing the twin disc in this situation. If we open up the box, we're greeted with the instruction manual. There's also some stickers in here. This is my second Centerforce clutch, so we've already gone through these instructions before. I have a video installing their Centerforce 2 on the back of my Turbo LS. Link in the description down below. Continuing past that, we have this foam protector, and then we have the gold pressure plate. This is their SST line, their more budget-oriented one. One level above this is their DYAD system, which is like the orange one. The rep tells me that this will hold anywhere from 800 to 900 pound-feet of torque, which means that if everything goes well, this clutch should be more than enough for what I'm trying to do with this car. Underneath that, we've got the solid hub clutch discs. Like I mentioned before, this is their SST, or in other words, their solid street twin. So you don't have springs in the hubs, they're all completely solid. The springs are mainly to cut down on vibrations and things like that, but I'm not too worried about that right now. Then we have a floater ring that goes in between the two clutch discs, and this just gives each disc its second mating surface. One disc goes in between the pressure plate and the floater ring, and then the other disc goes in between the flywheel and then the floater ring. These kits come completely balanced, so it's very important that you put everything exactly how they're supposed to be. Lucky for us, they went ahead and marked it for us, and there's a little red mark right there. There's a red mark right there, and then on the flywheel there's going to be another red mark to tell us where everything is supposed to go. Not only that, the clutch discs themselves also have an orientation. So this one tells you that it's supposed to be facing the floater, which means it will eventually be like this. And then this one says that it faces the floater on that side. And so then you know that this one is going to be facing it like this. So you're going to have one that's dished in, and then the one that's poking out will be the one that's facing the transmission. The red mark also tells you which way the floater ring is supposed to be installed. So if you have the pressure plate with the red mark right here, the red mark should be seen from where the pressure plate is. So if you have it upside down, you won't have that balance mark anymore. It's very important that you line this all up how it's supposed to be, because if you don't, it's probably going to introduce a little bit of vibration. Aside from the hardware, the only other thing that we were missing is the flywheel itself, and that's sitting here in the back of the engine. I've been using this flywheel to crank my engine over just so I can make sure that everything's all well and good. And lucky for me, I'd have no issue, so everything's all good there. On the big block Mopar, the pattern only goes on one way, but it is a pattern that is shared with the 3rd gen Hemi and the small block Mopar, which is why I was able to get a clutch kit for this engine in the first place. This is a perfectly machined surface, and it's supposed to be super clean, away from any kind of oil or debris, in order to facilitate the break-in process later on. So what I'm actually going to do first is I'm going to clean everything with an acetone rag, and you're just trying to get all that junk off of the mating surfaces. So after that, I'm going to drive the rest of the hardware in, and then we're going to torque it down. All of these nuts and bolts are actually supplied by ARP, so this will give you a little bit more peace of mind, and I won't have to worry about the flywheel coming off and cutting off my legs. I went through the complete instructions, and they didn't say anything about using thread locker on the bolts. I typically do like to use thread locker, so I think I actually will in this application. I just finished installing and torquing down the flywheel bolts. Normally these bolts come in a little baggie and it gives you the correct torque spec, but I actually lost that little baggie and I had to go and look it up online. Since Centerforce has so many different clutches online, they don't really have the specs. So the best thing you could do is to actually call them. But it's Saturday afternoon and I really want to get this done. So what I did is I actually looked up the torque specs for the ARP bolts themselves, and then I compared them to the factory bolt torque setting. Factory torque setting is 55 pounds, and the torque setting that I found for the ARP version of these bolts was 75 pounds. So I decided to go with an even 70 pounds for the bolts, which should still put me somewhere in a safe range. And the torque spec that I was able to find for the clutch cover bolts was 55 pounds, so that's what I'm going to go with on those. Before I went ahead and assembled the friction discs, I went ahead and I slid these over the input shaft of the transmission just to make sure that the spline was correct. Some splines may look similar but not the same, and that'll prevent you from assembling everything. So taking an extra 15 seconds to make sure that your clutch discs actually match your input shaft could save you a lot of trouble down the road. Moving on to the trickiest step is actually getting all of this together. So Centerforce actually gave me 2 pilot bearing tools, and the only difference between them is the difference between the hole on the pilot. And from what I can tell, mine's going to be the smaller one of the two, so that's the one we're going to go with. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and slide these little spacer adapters that are going to go on the back of the flywheel. These are actually really important because this is what sets up the entire clutch system. If you're missing one or you replace one with something else, you can see things like chatter, severe warping on the flywheel, and overall you're going to have a really bad day. So do not lose any of these. Let's go ahead and slip them on before I forget. So now it's time to start stacking all these pieces together, starting with the one that's supposed to go to the flywheel. Because it goes flywheel, clutch disc, floater, clutch disc, pressure plate, and we already have the flywheel installed, the next item is the first clutch disc. Since we know the next item after this is going to be the floater, we need to pick one that'll have the floater sitting on top of this, which is going to be this one right here that is labeled floater side. So we're going to go ahead and lay this one on top of the box right here. Then we're going to go ahead and grab the floater itself, which is this one. Take care to keep that balancing mark facing up so that way you can line everything up the way it's supposed to be. After that, you have the second clutch disc. We're going to double check that it will be facing the floater side, and according to this, everything is correct. So we're going to be laying this on top of there. Now that we've got one of the stacks ready to go, we're going to take the pilot bearing tool and we're going to go ahead and slip it in between both clutch discs so we can lock their orientations together. Normally I like to use a little bit of lubricant on the splines just to make everything go easier, and so then a little bit will be left over there for when I install the transmission. It'll also make removing the transmission a little easier, but in the past I have had contamination enter the clutch surfaces, and then that'll end up causing chatter and things like that in the future. So this time around I'm going to go ahead and install everything dry. Pilot bearing itself already has a little bit of lubricant, so I'm just going to rely on that to make sure everything gets installed properly. The next step is to take the clutch pack and the pressure plate and then present them to the back of the engine. That way you can start lining everything up and putting the nuts on. As you're assembling everything, make sure that the floater plate is seated correctly against the pins. You shouldn't have to force anything. Everything goes in together pretty seamlessly. After you got the pressure plate on, go ahead and put on the 6 or 7 or 8 nuts that come with your clutch kit, and then go ahead and snug them down by hand. You should be able to wiggle the alignment tool pretty easily, so go ahead and push it up against the block to make sure it's perfectly lined up, and then you can run down the nuts with an impact driver. Once the nuts are ran all the way down, go ahead and torque everything to its appropriate torque spec. Now that I've got everything assembled, torqued down, good to go, the last step is to actually pull the alignment tool out of the twin disc. If you've done this correctly, the tool should just like pop out, no problem. But if you've done this incorrectly, you won't be able to pull this out easily. This will determine how easy or difficult it will be to line up your transmission to your engine. So let's go ahead and just give it a little bit of force. I'm just going to use one hand and there we go. You guys can see the lube from my pilot bearing. Make sure you didn't leave any kind of excessive lube anywhere on here that'll damage the clutch material. And then just make sure that all your alignment marks are seated the way they are supposed to be. We've got 1, we've got 2, and then we've got the 3 alignment marks. Everything is torqued down and it's all good to go. So if you guys have any questions installing your own SST, go ahead and post them in the comments down below. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher signing out.